We're continuing our series called The 10, which is about the 10 Commandments. And we've gotten ourselves into, if you'll recall, a sub-mini-series on the Sabbath, which I continue to get more excited about, more convicted about as this goes along. But have you ever been at a social gathering or a party and there's someone unexpected shows up? I guess you didn't, well, if it was your party, you didn't plan for them to be there, or if you're just at some gathering of someone else's and you meet somebody, just was an unexpected sort of delight that you were glad about it. Back in the 90s, some of us in this room, and even more people outside of it, on a Friday or Saturday night would venture to Newark, Delaware. And there's Main Street, if you're familiar with it. It's a one-way deal, and then you go down the backside, it's one way, and it was the Loop. Yeah. Webb's smiling. Webb knows. So I don't know how long that's been going on, Webb. Cruising Main Street down in Newark before I was here. Which is just funny. It's great. We'd go down there, and there would be all kinds of, first off, it was jam-packed. Okay, let's do a little confession time. I'm just curious. Now, can I see a show of hands of people who have participated in this particular event? Let's get them up high. Let's go ahead and, that's a fair amount in this room. How many of you have participated in similar events in other places? Because maybe you didn't grow up. I would gather, we're looking at like 70% of the room has done the cruise thing somewhere. Okay, cool. Well, down there, for me as a teenager, it's trucks, it's cars, it's bikes, it's girls. It's just the whole vibe. It's lights, it's sounds, and you're doing like 2 miles an hour. And acting the fool or not, it depends on your personality. But there was just so much there. So this one particular weekend, a group of us had gone down there to do whatever. Mom, Dad, you just drive around, We weren't smoking weed or drinking, so we were just cruising around. Sometimes a little street racing, whatever. Unexpected guests. We had met some girls down there. And the reason I bring it up is to say that 2 of those girls have become the wives, still are wives, of 2 good friends of mine. It's unexpected. Our first get-together as a group was coming here on a Sunday evening. Because as we talked to them that night down there in Newark, we found out that they too were Christians and had similar practices, and so they were cool with coming here on a Sunday night, and that's how that thing got kicked off. But just an unexpected guest, an unexpected delight. The Sabbath is similar. We have an idea of the Sabbath. It's nice and it's reasonable. But then there's a new facet to it, a new player that shows up in our understanding about Sabbath, and it turns out that Sabbath can go from being somewhat sedate and social to really becoming sort of celebratory, and it's a party. And so we're going to look more at who this new player is in the Sabbath as we unfold this. But I want to just put us back in Exodus chapter 20, chapter 8 through 11. This is the 4th command, and it is, I saw one statistic this week in studying. The number of words, the amount of language given to this 4th command compared to all 10 taken together, it takes up 37% of the entire list of 10 commandments. It's the one that we've said before, it's kind of in the middle, and it connects the vertical relationship with the horizontal relationships. So it's rather important in respect to how much space it takes up within the 10 commands and where it's positioned within the 10 commands. And it may explain partially why we're spending more time on it. It's not that it's more important, but it is, ironically, as we saw last week in the statistics, one of the ones that we overlook the most, or the one that we feel is most, oh, take it or leave it, you recall? So let's look at this. Exodus chapter 20, verse 8 through 11, it says, "Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male servant or your female servant, or your livestock, or the sojourner who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy." This morning I want to walk you through two passages that will shed light on, one, the uniqueness of this seventh day called Sabbath, and two, the characteristic of the kind of rest that God gets, or God designed to us to get. Let me start that again. The characteristics of the kind of rest God designed us to get from the Sabbath. That's a lot of words. 37% of my sermon was just said. Kidding. Hot crowd, hot crowd. All right. You know, when we talked about a party, we going somewhere, we're meeting somebody new. When you're introduced to someone, or you're introducing yourself to someone, they're introducing themselves to you. What's the first bit of ourselves we share? Oh, okay. Kelly does what you do. That's one of the first bits for sure, Kelly. Yeah. Actually, I do recall that there's a statistic that we are more prone to talk about what we do with people when we meet them, as though what we do is what defines us. But the name, we're going with the name this morning. I also heard, and I couldn't find it, but I did hear a statistic a long time ago. Somebody said that we don't remember the first 5 seconds of a conversation that we have with other people. And then the application was made. That's usually where we introduce ourselves. We tell them our name. "Hi, my name's so-and-so." And then you start talking. And then you're done, right? And what happens? You walk away and you say to your spouse, what was their name? Yeah. Even before kindergarten, now there's a point to this. Even before kindergarten, many of us begin to teach our kids the days of the week. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, so forth. And we get to Saturday and Sunday, right? This was the weekend. Unless, of course, you've been raised at Beulah under the tutelage of Pastor Roger. I'm just saying that because you're here. Welcome. But we know inherently, we treat the week like a work week, but we know, having been brought up in the church, we know that Sunday is actually the first day of the week. And Saturday is the last day. But I wonder how many of us have really given so much thought or tried to explain to our kids the historical Jewish concept of days. Here's what's interesting. Nope, before we get into what's interesting, nope, can't say that either, because the next thing is, let's turn to Genesis chapter 1, which is also interesting. That's all I want to make clear. Genesis chapter 1, we're going to find something about the seventh day that maybe you've noticed and maybe you haven't. Genesis chapter 1, we're going to read verse 31, and we're going to continue into chapter 2, verse 3. So, "And God saw everything that he made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the sixth day. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. And on the seventh day, God finished his work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work he had done. So God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it God rested from all his work that he had done in creation." I feel like somehow my notes are out of order, but we're going to keep going. You follow with me, and we'll be good by the end of it. The seventh day, God made it holy. There is actually a sort of a teacher, a pastor. I believe they're out of Florida, but that's irrelevant. His name is Tom Bradford. I've mentioned him before. He does a nice job of connecting Jewish culture and religion with Scripture. And here's what he says about this seventh day. He writes, "It was relatively late in history before cultures started to give names to the days of the week. Prior to that, the best evidence is that the days were simply numbered. The Hebrews to this day continue to use the numbering rather than naming." So you see, day 1, day 2, day 3 on seventh day, sixth day, fifth day, fourth, whatever. We call them Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. He said, but that's a relatively new phenomenon. So he says that Hebrews to this day continue to use the numbering rather than the naming, except, of course, for the seventh day, which is given the name Shabbat. Of all the days that Genesis 1 tells us about it, they're all just numbers. The first day, second day, the third day. And we know this because there's a repeated phrase about it being the phrase is this that gets repeated, and there was evening and there was morning the first day, the second day. But when it comes to the seventh day, it gets a name, Shabbat. Rest, stop, cease. That in itself is intriguing, yeah? Of all the days that God picked, there's a 6-day scenario. It's like we tend to think of the work week or the week as being 7 days, but maybe in terms of a Hebrew context, a Jewish context, it may make a little better sense to think of it as a 6+1 day, a 6+1 week. In that there are 6 days, but then there's the +1. There's the new player to the party, and the name is Sabbath. And this day is different. It's a personal day, so to speak, although now I realize that sounds like you're taking a personal day, which in effect, he's calling us to take a personal day. How many of you followed what I just did there? Anyone? It's one person brave enough to nod their head forward. 2, Anna is in a circle. Appreciate your honesty. It's really about personal days versus vacation days, sick days, such. Okay. All righty. So God said this day was very good. All the other days, he finishes his work and he says, it's good, it's good, it's good. And then on this seventh, this day of rest, this day of ceasing, he looks and he says, all that I've done is very good. And that's a clue to something that we're going to find as we continue to kind of consider what is it about this rest that God takes on Sabbath. What he does on the seventh, it wasn't because he was wore out, right? He does it as a model, but there's something in his rest that's there to help us. Having completed his creative work, I would say that rest is actually his next activity. It was a ceasing from creation, but it was not a ceasing from activity. We can go through our week in a way that we may cease from our work without necessarily ceasing from activity. And in the next couple of weeks, we're going to explore that a little more. But it does get to begin to explain a little more about how God rested on that Sabbath day. Down through the ages, we've talked about this before, but down through the ages, scholars have understood the intentional omission of the phrase evening and morning, being whatever day. It is missing when it comes to the Sabbath. What we read there in Genesis the end of chapter 1 and the beginning of chapter 2, when he talks about the Sabbath, there is no, and the evening and the morning were the seventh day. That's missing. And so that's why scholars have long made the observation that this could be a clue that the life in his garden was to be a perpetual kind of Sabbath where he, along with mankind, would rule together, work together, and delight in all they had done together, all he had done and how they participate in it together. It's an open-ended sort of situation. So it wasn't that they would spend, Adam and Eve and whoever would spend eternity in, Sunday afternoon nap mode, in hang out in the hammock mode, but that their activity was going to be different on that day. And it begins to become more interesting to me, more of something that, I can get into that, when I think of it in those terms that God wanted us to just step back and enjoy. They would have spent, and we don't know how long, let me back up, we don't know how long Adam and Eve walked with God in that garden prior to the fall. And it doesn't really need an answer. The fact is that they did. And that they could have had weeks where they would just participate with God in enjoying the garden, in cultivating the garden, working without feeling like it was a burden, but they're just in his creation. They're involved with it. They're ruling over it. And the future was bright. But they would have spent these 6 days doing that, and then he would have taught them that on this seventh day, let's just enjoy everything we've done together. Let's go ahead, let's take a walk together. Let's enjoy the fruits that have grown. Let's just hang out with the animals. Let's enjoy this garden. I don't know if there were waves anywhere in the garden. Maybe they went surfing. It's kind of random. I get it. But that's the thing about the Sabbath and enjoying God's creation. We have our own patterns that we've set, and we have our own community and our own landscape and our own environments, even our home environments that we live in, and we're very used to them, we're very comfortable to them. But if we're honest and open-minded about it, there's so much in the world that God has created that really goes outside of that. And so if I say that Adam and Eve could have gone surfing one day, I'm only trying to get you to think about, well, what are the things that happen outside of my own personal experience? And am I, in fact, invited into those things? Am I invited to go into a rainforest? Am I invited to go and visit the Arctic? Am I invited to California? Wait, nobody wants to go to California. But somewhere where the environment is different. God has created this entire cosmos and the world that we live on, this little ball, and he has invited us to enjoy it. For 6 days, he says, I want you to work at it. And because of the fall, now let's talk about that. Because of the fall, this idea of a perpetual Sabbath has been cut short, right at the knees. And it can't happen. A perpetual Sabbath can't happen. But the model and the command, and Jesus also verifying that it is for man. Remember? Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath. That there is a day that he still wants us to come into, and there's no reason to think that anything will have changed in that this rest is really an activity to enjoy the fruit of all that he has done. And that covers a lot of ground. There is, if we're going to talk about the original idea of a perpetual Sabbath, and this series should take us here, but I just want to take a minute to talk about it. Brandon brought it up last week. Brandon Miller brought it up last week. He had questions about it. But what about what it says in Hebrews? There is a Sabbath rest for those who believe in Jesus. For those who trust Yahweh. He has a Sabbath rest that will be perpetual for them. But it isn't yet. We're now taking one day of the 7. And he said, I want you to begin to explore this with me. I want you to enjoy this with me. Because there will come a time when there is a rest that we enter into that will be perpetual in his kingdom. And that's worth looking at. Again, we're going to look into that. I trust our series will take us there. Suffice it to say that God's rest included delighting in all that he had accomplished in creation and in partnership with Adam and Eve. Now, this is where I want to show you where we get this idea from. During the introduction, I said that we would meet a new player in the Sabbath gathering, and we're going to find that new player here in Exodus chapter 31, verses 12 through 7. Exodus 31, verses 12 through 7, reads this way. It says, "And the Lord said to Moses, 'You are to speak to the people of Israel and say, above all, you shall keep my Sabbaths.'" Did you catch that? Above all, you shall keep my Sabbaths. Super important. Sabbath rest is so important to the Lord. He says, "Above all, you shall keep my Sabbaths, for this is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, that you may know that I, the Lord, sanctify you." So he's saying, above all, this Sabbath is to continue to be observed. And he said, it is also a sign throughout the generations that you may know that I, the Lord, sanctify you, that I, the Lord, set you apart. They are to be known by a Sabbath-keeping culture, or as a Sabbath-keeping culture. In all of the ancient literature available about the other cultures back in this time, no other culture, let me say it this way, other cultures we've seen have religious systems, they have these idols, the idol worship, these practices, right? And the whole bit we've just recently finished Judges is that the Israelites just want to assimilate these things. They want to get into it the way these other people do. But one thing that we don't find, that archaeologists or people who look at old texts from that era, they don't find any other culture that has a Sabbath practice. They don't have a day of rest. It is right there in the text that it is a sign that will set them apart from other cultures, that they are a people who God has set apart. And in setting apart a day of the week, others will see that they are a people set apart for God. And so, let's just keep reading here in Exodus 31. It says, "Between you and me and throughout your generations, that you may know that I, the Lord, sanctify you, you shall keep the Sabbath because it is holy." What does holy mean? Set apart for you. It is holy for you. It is set apart for you. Everyone who profanes it, get this, will be put to death. Yeesh. So we've already seen in Exodus 31, we've seen where God says, above all, I want you to keep the Sabbath. And then he says this bit about those who profane it shall be put to death. Oh dear. The takeaway, just on the face of it, is super important. It's imperative that God's people observe Sabbath. And I want to remind you, the first sermon we had on Sabbath miniseries was that it is a principle that exists outside of the Mosaic law. It was modeled at creation, right? It was commanded with the 10, and then verified by Jesus later. So this is a principle that extends beyond the Jewish people. And so we have to include ourselves in it. We have to give it some thought. We have to, when we read something like this, we really ought to give it its due value and say, my goodness, this is imperative to Yahweh. So the next thing he says there in the second part of verse 14, he says, "Whoever does any work on it, that soul shall be cut off from among his people." Really? Verse 15, 6 days shall work be done, but the seventh day is a Sabbath of solemn rest, holy to the Lord. Whoever does any work on the Sabbath shall be put to death. He repeated it. It's repeated. Verse 16, therefore the people of Israel shall keep the Sabbath, observing the Sabbath throughout their generations as a covenant forever. Forever. You keep the Sabbath as a covenant. as a promise, as a sign of being set apart unto me forever. Verse 17, it is a sign forever between me and the people of Israel, that in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, and on the seventh day, and here's where we're going to this, or here's where we're going with this, and on the seventh day he rested and was refreshed. Moses was told by God, the Spirit of God, probably face to face by God, about the event in Genesis chapter 1 and 2. And he's told, not only did God rest, which is the meaning of the word Shabbat, but we have an additional word, that he was refreshed. And so if we're having this conversation about if we are called to rest, if we are called to participate in Shabbat, Sabbath, and God rested, well, then what did his rest look like? And we're answering the question in part, like, well, what was God's rest like? And here we have a really helpful clue that's added much later. The person that we're excited to meet, that we never expected to meet at our little Sabbath party, is delight. The character, the part of Sabbath that we didn't see coming was delight. The word, and I'm going to explain where I get this. First of all, we understand the rested. We get that. We cease, we stop action. Now, the Hebrew word for refreshed means this. It's used in the following ways. They use it to interpret the word breathe freely. You should try it. Go ahead. I give you permission. Take a deep breath. And let it out. Now, for those of you who just had coffee, shame on you. The person in front of you is probably annoyed. Just kidding. But to breathe, just to breathe, to feel like you have the permission to stop and just be, that's something all by itself. So the word that we see in the English as refreshed, has been used in the Hebrew to be translated to breathe freely, to recover. Oh, all right, cool, recover. To sustain, support, or strengthen. Now, I should let you know, if you can visualize when the software that we use to study the Greek and the Hebrew and things like that, they have a diagram that enables us to see whatever word you're looking at. It's a circle, like a ring, and it's sort of like a pie chart, but the middle's empty, sort of. And it has different colors, different sections of the circle, and they're bigger or smaller, and they'll say, here's how this word was used in this way, how many times and where. Here's how it's used in this way, here's how it's, so you have larger and smaller sections about how, or the ways in which a particular word is used. And in this word that we see as refreshed, the major parts of that circle are the breathe freely, recover, support, strengthen. There are smaller chunks. They're still important. They're just not used as often. This is about how often it's used in these ways. But the word is used in these ways too, to drink, become fat. I don't think it means it in the sense the way Americans do it. I mean, you all know how we get fat, right? We just indulge and overeat. But in the ancient cultures, to be fat was a sign of blessing and a sign of riches. And it wasn't really about being overweight or unhealthy. It was about having your needs provided for, having enough, having an abundance. So to become fat was the way it was used. And then it was also used for delight, to accept, I would say to receive, to find relief. I like this one. This is somewhat, I like it because I had to really struggle with understanding why it was here. Smell. The word is used of smell. Okay. But the idea is that smell as in it's an open, fragrant, spacious sensation. to just, it gets close to breathe. Something that is sweet and not like a perfume, perhaps. Something that does us good, to take it in. That's the way the word refreshed is used. Breathe freely, recover, drink in, accept, delight, find relief, enjoy. That's what Yahweh did on the day of rest. He looked at everything he had created, from the atmosphere, the environment, the cosmos, the animals, the plants, the dry land, the ocean, Adam and Eve. He looked at it all and he delighted in it. He didn't just go back to his heavenly home, hang out his heavenly hammock, and kick his feet up with a straw hat over his eyes for Sabbath. That wasn't what was meant when it says Yahweh rested. He delighted in everything that he had created. And then what we see unfolding all throughout his word, all throughout Scripture, is that he is inviting you and I to participate in this, his kind of rest. His kind of refreshment. And he says a number of times, and we saw one this morning, that he has done this for you. He's done it for me. He has created a time that he takes very seriously, that we would be refreshed, that we would enjoy all that he's created, that we would enter into it, that we would just delight in all that exists around us. And that takes a little bit of imagination. It takes time. It takes time to think and to meditate on what you or I would do. What would you do if you had been given permission? We're doing this hypothetically because somehow it's easier. But what would you do hypothetically if the whole world recognized that everybody gets a break on a particular day, and then on that day you would just have the time to think about what delights you the most? What has God done? What has he created? What environment exists? What discipline, what pleasure, what play exists that you would involve yourself in that would just bring you an enormous amount of satisfaction and joy that you would delight in? Can you imagine if you had the freedom to take time just to do something? You say, you know what? I just want to be involved in that because it delights my heart. It brings me joy. It's something I always wanted to do, something I always wanted to know, something I always wanted to see. Because that's exactly what God's invited us into. And more than just an invitation for his people, right? We saw it. He's super serious about it. Like, above everything, look, I want you to observe the Sabbath because it is, everybody's going to see this as something that sets you apart. They're going to see that I set you apart. And so I want you to set apart time to do what delights you. Join in my refreshment. I begin to get excited about that. There's a theologian named K.A. Matthews who comments on the rhythm. And we're going to start talking about rhythm in the next couple of weeks or whatever. But the rhythm of a 6+1 sort of week. He says this: embracing God's Sabbath rest meant experiencing the sense of completeness and well-being God had accomplished at creation in behalf of all human life. Now, he goes on, he said, by the commemoration of the Sabbath, God and his creatures share in the celebration of the good creation. And God's people are enjoined to enter into the rhythm of work and joyful rest. The rhythm of work and joyful rest. Let's talk about the word rhythm for a minute. You know, we've made a lot of comments up in here over the years about our ability to clap to the songs. And we have learned that some of us, and perhaps I may be one, cannot keep rhythm. Every drummer especially, needs to know how to keep a rhythm. Can you clap with me? Can we get a rhythm here? Let's go. Yes. Let it get louder. Yeah. A rhythm. Jared, are you clapping? I see you barely moving. You're a drummer, boy. Yes. Yes. It's a rhythm. In and out and back and forth. Good job. Give yourselves a round of applause. This stunk. I don't want to do this anymore. Rhythm stinks. Rhythm is like that. The rhythm of work and Sabbath go hand in hand. It's a movement back and forth, back and forth. A 6-day work week is part of a bigger rhythm. We move in participation with God to do whatever it is He's called us to do during the week. For 6 days, we get into it. And then He says, but there's one day that I want you to come off the beat. There's one day that I want you to just... And then I want you to get back to the other 6. It's a rhythm. And it's been observed that all throughout creation, there's a rhythm. I'll give you some examples. There's a rhythm in the movement of planets cycling around and around that produces a rhythm of the seasons. There's a rhythm. There's a rhythm in the movement of the tides in and out, apparently because it has something to do with the moon's rhythm, that whole moving around and the gravity, right? There's a rhythm. And as we already practiced, there's a rhythm in our own bodies. Well, lots of rhythms, but we already practiced. In and out. In and out. There's a rhythm. And God wants us to be in rhythm with His 6+1 week, where we work. We do work. That's part of it. And because of the fall, sometimes it stinks. It's hard. Work is hard. It's toil. It's laborious. I mean, for those of you who don't know, it wasn't always laborious. Work always was. It's just that it became laborious after the fall, which is interesting. But that we would participate for 6 days, that we are actually, God said, look, let her rip, baby. Get into it. Spend yourself. Do what you do. And then, come join me. Be refreshed. So it's a rhythm. The problem that we face with the Western mindset is that, I'm going to overstate this for effect, but we have no rhythm. We will beat the drum to death. Day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, day 6, day 7, day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5. And it keeps going until we're sick of hearing the same stinking beat. That's not rhythm. That's a driving beat. God calls us into rhythm. Listen to this. I've been reading a book by a man named Dan Allender. It's called The Sabbath. I'll just read you some things that he shares in his book. He says, we often indulge in overwork and end up overwhelmed and exhausted. Did I need to quote that from somebody else's book for you to be aware of that? No. Madonna, no. Oh, we're familiar with that. Raj? Yeah. Right. He continues, he cites the following research, and he says this. He says, more than half of those polled, they did a poll, and I'm sorry, I didn't see how many they polled, but he says more than half of those polled said they had been overwhelmed by the amount of work to be done in the previous month. Now, I just want you to figure out whether you fit into this poll or not. Have you in the last month felt, you don't have to answer out loud, by the way. Have you in the last month felt overwhelmed by the amount of work that was to be done in the previous month? 1 out of 3 reports being chronically overworked. It doesn't stop. Work never stops, by the way. I don't need to tell you that. What I mean is that Oh, I got to get it done by the end of the week. Or what? Does it go away? Does our work just suddenly disappear and go somewhere else, and we have to make sure we get it done before it fleets into nothingness? Nope, still there. Anyway, sorry. 1 out of 3 reports being chronically overworked. Chronically is a key word there. As a result, he writes, more than half of white-collar workers, now look, I know some of you right there, you're like, well, that's not me. But just listen. More than half of white-collar workers log more than 40 hours a week. I also know that some of you right now are like, yeah, okay, 40 hours a week. Whoop-de-doo, superhero. More than half of white-collar workers log more than 40 hours a week, and 75% of those who work more than 40 hours do work on the, here's why I'm sharing this with you, do work on the weekend. What's the weekend? What days are the weekend? Go ahead. Yeah, when we're not on our guard, the weekend is Saturday and Sunday. I mean, it's the weekend. That's what it is. That's all it is. And so whether I work on them or I don't work on them, they're like any other day. They're the weekend. Right, we're talking about Sabbath. You see the problem. Allender goes on to write this. He says, he shares more statistics. This 37% of Americans take fewer than 7 days off per year. 37% of us take less than 7 days off per year. Since we've already looked at the Word of God and seen that He's calling us to take 1 day out of the 7, and we know that we have a 52-week year, that would mean that we should at least be 52 times. Did I say 57 weeks? 52 weeks. 52, bare minimum, right? And if we were doing letter of the law, under penalty of death, don't profane the day. So 52, but here 37% of us are taking less than 7 days off per year. Maybe that's not you. Here's another one. Only 14% take vacations of 2 weeks or longer. Lauren and I, and I've talked to a couple of you already, we have long said, most of you, I have never heard anybody, that's not true. Very rarely do I hear anybody say that they couldn't tolerate a 2-week vacation. Most of the time, it's a scenario where we say, by the end of the first week, because we tend to take 1-week vacations. By the end of the first week, I'm just beginning to unwind. Like I just felt it. It just began, but then we had to pack up and go home. 14%, only 14% get to or can take 2 weeks. That means 86% of Americans are taking vacations shorter than 2 weeks. Now, I'm not, whatever. I don't know who these people are. The third one, Americans take the shortest paid vacations in the world. We take the shortest paid vacations in the world. So it's not about money. It's not like this polling audience isn't taking a vacation because they can't afford not to work. These are people who are getting paid to take a vacation, and they're saying, nah, I'm too busy. I can't take a break. 20% of those who do take vacation days stay in touch with the office. So even of the ones who get a vacation, we tend to stay connected. I feel like that's going to show up in a short online somehow just there. There are consequences for ignoring the Sabbath. Other than the Mosaic law, there are some reasonable consequences, and you're aware of them, but I just want to put them up on the screen. I want you to see them because I think you can identify with some of them. When we ignore Sabbath practice, we experience burnout, stress, weak immune systems, brain fog, frayed relationships, and we feel distant from God. If we're doing this, and we have no Sabbath rhythm in our life, and you are a follower of Jesus Christ, and you begin to experience things like burnout, stress, weak immune systems, brain fog, frayed relationships, and you feel distant from God, what kind of person will that make you to others? To your wife, to your husband, to your children, to your coworkers, to your fellow brothers and sisters in Christ. What kind of person are you to them? More to the point, how are you treating others when you have no energy to take care of yourself? Sawyer's not up here, so I can bag on him. When bro gets tired, man, it's lights out. It attempt a person to be laying hands on children. You know what I'm saying? Tired people suck. You know, I get cranky for real. Anyone else? Can I see a show of hands when you're tired and you feel exhausted if you're cranky? I love the honesty. Thank you. Yeah, all right. If everybody else is going to raise their hand, you're darn right. That's what happens. Do you get the sense that that's what God's trying to avoid in part? That his people wouldn't run around cranky and mistreating one another and being mean and not being able to think clearly about what their purpose is, how they're going to live their life, how they're going to serve and provide for those around them. Medical studies, and I'm taking this on the authority of people who have written books and put this in their books, but I could not find the actual study. I did find references to the studies all over the internet, but I couldn't find the actual study yet. So I'll just say it this way. Medical studies suggest that observing Sabbath practices results in healthier, happier, longer lives. How much longer? There was a study done on Seventh-day Adventists whose Sabbath practices are rather rigorous. Now, we're not talking about theology here, we're talking about practice. And so when they practice Sabbath, when they have their set of Sabbath practices that many of them abide by, and they also have we should know, they also have a rather strict plant-based diet, so this contributes to what I'm about to say. But one such study found that Seventh-day Adventists, with their more rigorous adherence to Sabbath rules and plant-based diet, tend to live 11 years longer than the average Christian. 11 years. And the difference is that they have a plant-based diet, which, whatever, keep it, but that they're taking a day to rest. 11 years. Ella, you get 11 extra years by actually just obeying what God said. Isn't that awesome? I knew you'd think it was. Unless your life stinks and you don't want 11 more years of it. In which case, I'd like to say, do you think it stinks because you're not taking the Sabbath rest every week like we're supposed to? It's a life-changing time of refreshment and delight that God is inviting, commanding his people to participate in. And we kind of don't. Now I know that we have our practices and this is part of it. Good. But I think there are ways that we can improve. So in a world where work has become toil and in a culture where more people are working more often and end up feeling more overwhelmed, more unsatisfied, and increasingly more likely to flame out spiritually, emotionally, relationally, and physically, it is more essential than ever that we reconnect with the Lord's Sabbath rhythm. I mean, do you see the good in it for yourself? Jamie and I, a long time ago, I don't know if he'll remember, we were driving somewhere and we were talking about finances, and we were talking with somebody that you worked with, I think, at the time, And we made a parallel with sharing the gospel. Like, we can give, when someone is floundering financially and you want to give them sound financial advice that will help them. Most of the times, I can't say most of the times because I don't know the statistic, but there is an experience where people are resistant to the suggestions that could help them. I'd rather you not interfere with my life. I'm floundering just fine. Yeah, but you don't have to flounder is what I'm saying, did it? Or you realize that you're unsatisfied and you're unhappy because you've missed your purpose and you're not really connecting with the God that created you. He sent his son, and his son promised to give you a new kind of life, one that's really meaningful and really has everlasting implications. Yeah, but as one person I recently was texting about this, they said, yeah, well, we kind of do our own thing. Okay, look, I'm just trying to help. That's how I feel a Sabbath sermon could go over. God is saying, hey, it's a 6+1 situation. I've got rhythm for you, and I need you to step back and make sure you're observing the downbeat and the upbeat, that you're in rhythm with me. And we, by our actions, are saying, thanks, but no thanks. It's probably not that important. And God says, but it probably is. You need this. I've woven a rhythm into the fabric of creation so that you could enjoy it. I've given commands and explained in my word how important it is for you to join me in this breathing in, enjoying my creation, getting out and delighting in new things. I've done this for you. I want you to come and involve yourself with it. Like, that's the invitation. And people like myself will instead. By the way, this doesn't have to be work. This can be busyness. It can be a schedule that leaves no room for anything but what you want to do, what I want to do, because I'm important. In fact, I'm so important that if I don't keep doing this, other people will suffer. There's no way that other people can be successful if I don't keep doing whatever it is I'm doing. Blah, 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 blah. Stop stomping your foot, Ed. It's annoying, but that's how we live our lives. So if you're not, you say, well, I work Monday to Friday. I work 7 to 5. I'm home on the weekend. Okay, great. What are you doing on the weekend? We still will, well, we go to this person's house. We got this event. We got that. Tick, tock, tick. We just drive. Learning the rhythm is important, because that's how we get to be introduced to delight. That's how we get to know what delight is. Gives us time to think about it. I'm going to end. I know this has gone long. With this, I don't even care this morning, really. You're lucky. It is so important, this idea of Sabbath. I was studying Friday, and I'll be honest, the dumb dog needed to go outside. I went outside, and there was the warm sunshine, and the air was clean, and I was like, ooh, I'm studying Sabbath. This is a prime opportunity to take a minute. And I took a minute. I was picking up sticks, and I began to ask myself, why are you picking up sticks? Because I was actually enjoying it. And I remember thinking, as a kid, if my parents told me to go out and pick up sticks, I wouldn't enjoy it. Know what I'm saying? Ben, do you like picking up sticks? You got to do it when you're in a Sabbath mindset, man. I'm telling you, it's different. So I'm picking up sticks, and I asked myself the question, why am I picking up sticks? And I thought, because this is my space. Okay, great. It's your space. You're picking up sticks. But I want my space to be able to be enjoyed. I want my family and my friends to be able to come into my space and relax. That's why I'm picking up sticks. And because I'm picking up sticks so that my family and friends can enjoy themselves, so that I can create a place where people can relax, it's a joy for me to pick up sticks. And it was like the Holy Spirit was like, you're funny. That's how life's supposed to be lived. To delight doesn't mean that we take a nap and that we pull away from everything else and everyone else on a Sunday. Which, by the way, I need you all to know, if you're thinking critically, I don't conflate the Sabbath with Sunday. They're two separate days, but there are Sabbath practices that many of us could do on a Sunday. That's another sermon. That's why we're doing a series. But anyway, that will also end up online. To create a space where you can enjoy fellowship with the people that you love is a noble pursuit. It's good. We have space. And it reminds me, or God reminded me of the garden, where he created a space that was good. And he invited all of creation to enjoy the space, to participate in delight together. So take the sticks. It's anecdotal. Maybe you don't even have sticks in your yard. I don't know. But the idea is this. I'm going to give you 3 things, and we're going to bounce out of here. Or at least we're going to go talk about it upstairs. I share the story of the sticks to illustrate this, that setting apart the Sabbath sets us free to dream, to imagine, and to think more deeply about all kinds of things. You see, my experience picking up sticks led to a conversation about why I would bother picking up sticks and why I, in fact, was actually enjoying picking up sticks in his sunshine, in the clean air. And it gave me time to think. And I was like, oh my goodness, time to think. We're so busy, too often we don't have time to think in God's creation. So here's this. The Sabbath is a day to stop, we know, because the master of Shabbat has given us the divine permission to do so. The Sabbath is a day to connect with Yahweh's creation, to feel or sense our place within it, being out on a day where the sun hits you and warms you and being able to breathe in clean air, just to see all that he's created, to take time to connect, but not just with his creation in terms of the environment, but his creation in terms of our relationships with other people. Like connecting is part of Sabbath. May I remind you that we are not only members of his creation, we are co-rulers with him over it. That's why we pick up sticks, proverbially. We create space. A church creates a holy space, a set-apart space in the world. We are a garden in the world that invites people to come and take a breath and see what true life is like, refreshing life is like, see what the rhythm of God is like. We are the garden. We'll do the work that needs to be done so that others can come and enjoy that. And how that looks in your life also. We are participants with the divine, so we connect. Thirdly, the Sabbath day is a day for delight. And this was the newcomer to the party, being refreshed. That the Lord himself was refreshed, I think, is an eye-opener. That we are invited to do the things that bring us delight. That we delight in family and friends that he's placed in our life. That we delight in all that he has provided in our life. That we delight in all that he has accomplished in our lives, both the present and in the future. We just delight in it. We imagine what we might do if I could just sit and enjoy all that God has created. Delight. We Westerners tend to use our time preparing, working, constantly moving, doing, going, never stopping from our labor long enough to realize how significant a Sabbath is. We have an unholy tendency to operate in a mode of perpetual preparation where we rarely swing back into the Sabbath rhythm. So I just want to ask yourself, or I just want you to ask yourself, do I perpetually prepare? Like, preparation is good. It's a 6+1. Prepare in the 6 days that you have for the +1. Prepare for the day that has a name, the Sabbath. Prepare for a time of rest. Don't always prepare and then start over preparing. That's this. But get into rhythm and take the rest. The Sabbath rhythm. In the meantime, I leave you with this. The seventh day, named Sabbath, is a part of a rhythm woven into creation that is meant for you to stop, to connect, and to delight in all that Yahweh has created. When we talk about Sabbath, this needs to be a part of our practice that we delight. In the coming weeks, we're going to look at even more about how we can do that, what it looks like, what it involves. But in the meantime, whatever you can do today, think about doing it in a way that you're just enjoying the people around you, the world outside that God has made, the abilities you've been given. Pick up an instrument, read a book, write a poem, go for a walk, have a conversation, enjoy good food. These are the kinds of things that God wants us to do, to delight ourselves in. Would you pray with me? Father, I know that I've taken more time than usual, but you, God, have created time, and you've given us just a really good model. You've shown us how to spend, how to use what we're to be doing inside of that time, that we're to work. But thank you so much for what you're showing us, the kind of this series, Father, just teaching us what it means to get into the rhythm of your rest. This is good, and I'm excited about it, Father. I wanted to pray for folks here that today might be another day where they start to think about let me say it a different way. God, that you would lead them in their meditation, in their thinking, in their wondering, in their dreaming about what it would look like in their own life to be refreshed. God, I want that for them. You want that for them. And as we come and follow you, and we're just looking into your word and learning new things about what this means, Father, I would ask for your blessing. I ask that this is something that you would come and bring change in our life, not just something that sounded good at a point in time, but this might be a new sort of leg of our journey where we kind of take this in. Father, I want to thank you for giving us this principle, this cosmic principle, Sabbath. We just needed a breath of air, and every little instance that we've tasted and seen that you're good, every little time that we've done something that falls in line with this Sabbath idea, it's been so good. So we've seen hints, we've taken breaths, and that's been a real blessing and privilege. But to live a life this way, God, we just ask that you would give us freedom. Well, you've given us freedom, but man, help us learn how to step into it. So I pray for folks in that way. And I pray in the name of the Master of Shabbat. In Jesus' name, amen. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, you can reach out to us through our webpage, bbcoxford.com. We'd love to be able to help you as best we can.